unmuted.
This is the Socorro Planning and Zoning Commission, October 19th, 2021, 5:31 p.m. We call this meeting to order.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to move on to item number 2, establishment of quorum. Mr. Andrew Arroyos,
Here.
Mr. Enrique Cisneros,
Here.
Mr. Ernest Gomez, Mr. David Estrada, Mr. Arturo Lafuente,
Here.
Ms. Julie Dominguez is absent, and Ms. Miriam Cruz will be appearing today by Zoom, but will not be counted for quorum today. So we have quorum with 6 commissioners present. Moving on to item number 3, notice to the public open forum. Ms. Diana, do we have anyone that would like to speak?
No, we do not.
Moving on to item number 4, consent agenda, approval of meeting minutes of October 5th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cisneros. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you so much, Mr. Estrada. So I have a motion made by Mr. Cisneros, seconded by Mr. Estrada. Now I'd like to take a vote. Mr. Andrew Arroyos,
I will abstain.
Mr. Enrique Cisneros,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ernest Gomez, Mr. David Estrada,
Yes.
Mr. Arturo Lafuente,
Yes.
Ms. Julie Dominguez is absent, and Ms. Miriam Cruz.
She's connecting. She's having some connection issues.
Thank you so much. Motion carried. Moving on to item number 5, consider and take action on the proposed final plat approval of Valle del Sol Unit 5, being track 13A1E, Block 8, Socorro Grant, Socorro, Texas. Mr. Carlos?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Carlos Gainad with the Planning and Zoning Department. The one item that we have on the agenda today is a final plat. You all have seen the preliminary plat, I believe, on May 4th, 2021. And next slide, please. Next slide. So again, just a little bit of background. This is, the property is vacant. It is about 7 acres. It is zone C2. The future land use map causes commercial. Applicant is requesting the final plat. Again, you saw the preliminary plat back in May, and this is the final plat so that they could start with their development. We are recommending approval. And the next slide, please. Here's the location map. So it's, I think you all are familiar with the parcel on North Loop. Next slide. Here is the zoning map, C2. It's a parcel with the star, the yellow star in the middle. Next slide. Here's the property images and some location shots of the property. Next slide. There's the aerial. Next slide shows the larger aerial. And then the next slide, I believe, shows the plat. And it is 2 lots for the subdivision. And again, this is the final plat. You've seen the preliminary. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions if anybody else does.
Who's the applicant, Mr. Gallinat?
The applicant is Mimco, Mimco Properties, and their engineer is Conde. He's on the line? Yes, and I believe he's on the line. If he, I didn't know he was on the line, but Mr. Conde, if you wanted to provide any other comments?
No, there's no comments from us unless there's any questions that we need to answer.
Mr. Gallinat, on the final plat, do we get a sense of what's going to be on there?
You know, so you don't get a sense of what's going to be on there. The plat is sort of the the horizontal development. The vertical development comes later, but I'll defer to the applicant. I know that there's some talk of some apartments. The zoning is C2. They would have to rezone to R2 for the apartments. I think you all have seen that come to you maybe in the past, but that's a question for Mr. Conde.
At this time, they're just planning on retail. retail pad sites at this point, as far as we know.
And it's Conde?
Yes.
Mr. Conde, is MIMCO planning to develop and keep it commercial property like the rest? What we've seen around town of MIMCO properties, usually it's shopping centers. Is that what you guys are thinking?
That's a partial plan. Again, like Carlos said, there was a thought about maybe including some apartments as well to give it more of a mixed use, but that's still in the works. It's nothing finalized at this point.
I didn't get all that.
I think he said that it's still up in the air, a little bit in flux, but it's zone C2. Again, he mentioned that they had talked about apartments, which is what I've been, as been told as well, but I don't think they have anything final yet.
Because if I remember correctly, I when I first saw it, I didn't really remember when we first saw it, but now that in conversations it's coming up, it's coming back to me. If I remember correctly, one of the biggest point of contentions, if this is the same, if it's the one that I'm thinking of, one of the points that was most contentious was that hopefully they were going to have a turning lane if it was going to be apartment complexes, but since we don't know,
Maybe Mr. Conde could speak to that, because they still have to coordinate with TxDOT, so that might still be part of the item. And I think there may be some right of way, Conrad, that is dedicated to North Loop to TxDOT.
That's correct. This property is already dedicated 20 feet of additional right-of-way for the widening of North Loop. At this point, TxDOT has not requested any other improvements at this time.
Mr. Conde, does MIMCO also own the two properties, the two commercial vacant properties that are adjacent to these? Or to this one in particular?
Yeah, I think they are in the process. That's correct. They're in the process of purchasing the next property as well.
I have no further questions.
I make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
A second.
I have a motion made by Mr. Arroyos to approve and seconded by Mr. Estrada. I'd like to take your votes. Mr. Andrew Arroyos,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Enrique Cisneros,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ernest Gomez,
Yes.
Mr. David Estrada,
Yes.
Mr. Arturo Lafuente,
Yes.
Ms. Julie Dominguez is absent, Ms. Miriam Cruz.
No.
Motion carried. Moving on to item number 6, Planning and Zoning Commissioners Report.
Commissioner,
I have nothing to report either.
Item number 7, Planning and Zoning Department Report.
we also don't have anything, Mr. Chair and Commissioners.
Moving on to item number 8, Excuse Absent Commission Members. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank
I
you, Mr.
second.
Gomez.
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Arroyos. I have a motion made by Mr. Gomez to excuse, seconded by Mr. Arroyos. Let me take your vote. Mr. Andrew Arroyos,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Enrique Cisneros,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ernest Gomez,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. David Estrada,
Yes.
Mr. Arturo Lafuente,
Yes.
Ms. Julie Dominguez is absent, Ms. Miriam Cruz.
Abstain.
Motion carried. Moving on to final item number 9, consider and take action on the adjournment of this meeting. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Easy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arroyos. And second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Cisneros. I have a motion made by Mr. Arroyos to adjourn and seconded by Mr. Cisneros. Mr. Andrew Arroyos,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Enrique Cisneros,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ernest Gomez,
Yes.
David Estrada,
Yes.
Mr. Arturo Lafuente,
Yes.
Ms. Julie Dominguez is absent, Ms. Miriam Cruz.
Yes.
Motion carried. Meeting adjourned at 5:40 p.m. Thank you, everyone.